Hello everyone, Republic Jim here. I'm out for another walkabout on the property and getting off the beaten path today, heading towards the back of our acreage where I have not been in months. Once again, the temperature is above freezing, so the snow is really melting down. It's very loose and slippery, which makes for pretty slow and difficult going, which actually ties in nicely with what I wanted to talk about today. I don't claim to be any expert on snowshoeing, but I really do enjoy it and try to get out and do it with a pack, whenever I have the opportunity. And of course, I sometimes make use of that skill in search and rescue missions. But when I originally started doing snowshoeing, I had some misconceptions about how they work and what you can do. And since that time, just talking with other people and with reading different comments online and that sort of thing, I've got the impression that a fair amount of people have some pretty common misconceptions about snowshoes. So I want to just talk about some of the harsh realities. And basically this video is targeted towards beginners or people that are thinking about trying out snowshoeing, just to give a little better idea of what sort of expectations to have and hopefully to be able to plan accordingly and make it a more enjoyable and safer time. So what I'm going to do is, I brought along some notes since I don't really have this all memorized, so I'm going to find a place to sit down and get the pack off and hopefully have a little bit better sound quality when I'm not tromping through the snow. And then I'll get into the subject and elaborate, and hopefully there will be something useful there for any newcomers. All right, that's better. Not quite all the comforts of home, but at least I have a log and a dry piece of padding to sit on. So, getting back to the topic of the harsh realities of snowshoeing, the number one misconception that I had, and I think a lot of people that are new to snowshoeing have, is the idea of flotation. Now, all the snowshoes advertise what weight they're rated for, and especially if people have one that's rated for heavier than what they are, it's not uncommon to have the idea that they'll be just walking on the surface of the snow, which was my basic impression when I was starting out. The idea that you're going to just trek across the surface like a water bug skipping across on, the surface of the water. And people need to understand that under all but the rarest of conditions, that's just not the reality. Now, there are times where the snow is melted down and refrozen and stuff, and you get that hard crust, especially in late winter, early spring, and you can walk right on top of it. But in those circumstances, sometimes you can even walk on top of it without snowshoes. So, that's kind of a rare circumstance. But if it's powder or just deeper wet snow and it doesn't have that crust on it, you need to understand that to some extent at least you're always going to sink in, probably more than what you're expecting. That said, it still makes it much easier, especially in deep snow, than if you're on, you know, just wearing boots on foot, where you'll sink in and continue to sink until almost the point where you hit ground. The snowshoes will pack it down and distribute the weight to where it'll stop sinking in at some point, but there are definitely times where you could still be sinking in almost up to your knees. So, you know, go into it with the expectation that the so-called flotation is just helping to stay near the surface, but definitely not on the very surface. And of course, the larger and the higher weight rating of the shoes, the better chance you have of staying near the surface. But even with the best of them, in most conditions, you're going to sink in. That's just the reality of it. Another thing to know is that you will occasionally fall down, especially when you're starting out, but sometimes even when you've been doing it for a long time, there's just times where you can slip up or accidentally step on the other shoe, hook the toe on like icy crust or something as you're picking your foot up, and it can throw you off balance. And the deeper the snow, the harder it makes it to get back up once you do fall down, especially if you're wearing a pack. There's a good chance you'll have to take the pack off just to try to get back up to your feet, because especially like in deep powder, you can put a hand down and just keep pushing your arm into the snow and never hit anything solid. So there's nothing to push off against to help you get back up to your feet. It takes a little bit of athleticism and practice to master getting back up. And it certainly helps to have a trekking pole, because then you can push that down through the snow and hopefully hit something solid and greatly extend your reach, so that makes it a lot easier to get back up. But just be prepared to occasionally feel foolish or look foolish and take a dive in the snow. That's, especially as a beginner, you're going to feel pretty awkward with these big things strapped on your feet, and sometimes it ends up looking a bit like a clown show. So, as I said, you know, trekking poles really help out with that. You don't need to have poles to go out snowshoeing. I've done a lot of it without any poles and have gotten by just fine. But especially if you're on hillier terrain, anything steep or side hills, or if the snow, like it is right now, is really loose and slippery and such, having a good pole with the basket end on it can definitely help out with just stabilizing and such, especially as a beginner. Might really help prevent some of those falls that would happen otherwise. So recommend getting just some lightweight poles. They don't need to be anything fancy, but even just a wooden walking stick can be better than nothing. But now these collapsible poles are so inexpensive and easy to carry that it's just worthwhile having those along. Another harsh reality that you should be prepared for is that breaking trail on fresh snow is really tiring. I mean, even just walking with snowshoes in general is tiring, but if you're on an established trail where lots of people have walked, then it's not too bad. But if you decide to head off across country and you're punching down into the snow and having to lift your foot up with every step, it gets tiring in a hurry, much more so than you might think. And you're also going to get a lot warmer than you expect. So I would also suggest heeding that advice that they give for hiking in general, any sort of outdoor activity like that, that start out cold. Do not dress too warmly, especially if you're heading out cross country on unbroken snow, because it's going to be very tiring and you'll work up a sweat in a hurry. Now, one that people really need to understand is that snowshoeing is slower than what you would expect. Don't think because you can head out and do a miles-long day hike in the summer that you're going to be able to accomplish the same thing on snowshoes, especially when you're just getting started and your muscles haven't gotten used to that motion. But even the most experienced people, it's slower than what you would think. You know, yes, you can build up to where you can make a pretty good pace, but in general, when you're planning a trip, like if you're doing a loop hike or traveling to a certain destination, allow more time than what you think you should need, because most likely it's going to take all of that time, and you want to make sure that you either get back before dark or that you have along headlamps and other equipment in case you are out after dark. Another related reality there is that you can't go as far as what you'd expect, partly because of it being slower and taking more time. So you're just plainly going to eat up a bunch of the day trying to travel the same distance as what you would easily on a hike. But then there's just the reality that it's more tiring and uses different muscles. So even if you have all day to go snowshoeing, you're just plainly not able to cover as much ground as you can when you're just hiking on bare ground. It will wear you down faster. So unless you're in just excellent physical shape and your muscles are used to the motion of snowshoeing, just figure that you're going to run out of energy at some point. So don't plan any extravagant long hikes. Start out easy and build up and see what you're able to do. So I've mentioned a couple of times about muscles that aren't used to that motion. One of the biggest things that I've found is the hip flexors. Just walking with snowshoes is an entirely different motion than regular hiking, just because your feet are further apart, you have more weight on your feet, and you have to pick your feet up higher to clear the snow, especially if you're breaking trail or in any kind of deep snow. And that really hits the hip flexors and some of the muscles on the insides of the legs. And it's something that if you haven't done it, it definitely takes a while to get used to. And the first few times you do it, you will feel it the next day. So even if you don't feel it too much while you're snowshoeing, be prepared to wake up the next day and be pretty stiff and sore. It's even after doing a fair amount of it throughout the winter, I still find that if I go for any long hike or if I carry too much weight in my pack and pull the sled and that sort of thing, then my hip flexors still get pretty tired and sore, and it's just entirely different. And I can't really fully explain it. You just have to experience it. But be aware that that's something that you need to expect, and don't be caught off guard by that. There's a balancing act too with snowshoeing, that you want to limit how much weight you're carrying, just because it's the combination of your body weight and whatever you're carrying is the total weight that your snowshoes have to support. And obviously the more weight there, the more likely you are to sink in deeper. So your natural reaction is going to be to try to keep it as light as possible so you're not sinking in too much, and also so you don't get as tired. But on the flip side of that, especially if you're going out into the backcountry in any sort of unbroken area, it's a lot less accessible to most people and more isolated. So there's a lot more opportunity for something to go wrong and for you to find yourself in a situation where it's hard for any rescuers to get to. So by that token, you want to have more emergency gear, more light and fire making stuff, first aid equipment, any of that sort of thing, where if something goes wrong and you're stranded out in the snow, you can count on it being cold and getting dark quicker in the winter. So you want to be prepared for those emergencies. Whatever you do, don't decide to go out on some backcountry snowshoeing trip and carry just like a fanny pack or something. Definitely carry along enough gear that if the worst case happens, that you can at least survive through the night and hopefully get help to you before anything goes too bad. So, you know, for anybody that's worried about the weight, you might have to look into spending a little more money and going with the ultra lightweight stuff like some thru hikers do. I personally don't. I just go ahead and carry pretty much everything but the kitchen sink and just expect that I'm going to be sinking in more and getting more tired. But the reality is you have to know that trade-off, whether you're carrying more weight or if you're going lighter but less prepared, and just make your plans accordingly. One real harsh reality for those who are on a limited budget is that if you want good quality snowshoes, you're going to have to be prepared to spend a pretty substantial amount of money. And you know, everybody's definition of that is different. I've never had that much money to spend on my gear, so when I did finally decide to bite the bullet and get my new shoes, it cost quite a bit more than I would have considered spending in the past, but I finally reached the point where I felt it was worth it to spend a little more and get something that was really good quality, having experienced some of the mediocre and low quality ones. But you know, like if you look on Amazon, there's a huge range in prices. You can find snowshoes for as little as about $30, all the way up to some of the high-end ones like MSR. They're sort of not mountaineering, but that type of thing. You know, they're high-end, lightweight, high traction ones can be well over $300. So just know that there's a big range there. And if you're on a budget and you're just getting started out, I highly recommend that you not spend a bunch of money right off the bat. Ideally, if you can borrow some good snowshoes or rent them fairly inexpensively, then you can experiment with that. But just know that for starting out, my recommendation is to begin just on primarily level ground. Do not start out trekking up into the mountains or in backcountry situations. Find a spot where it's short, easy, level hike, and you know, preferably with an established trail that others have gone on, so you're not doing any real hardcore trail breaking or anything. And by doing that, you can get some of those low-end snowshoes. You know, you can get ones for $50 that are going to do anything that you want in that type of setting, and give you a chance to just get out there and practice it and get familiar with the movement and see some pretty country, you know, have some enjoyable outings like that, and then gradually build up. If you enjoy that, then look at getting into the more rugged terrain and going off the beaten path. And at that point, especially if you're doing any sort of side hill, then you're going to want ones that have better traction than just the aluminum frame ones with the crampons right on the ball of the foot. You know, you need this side foot traction and various other functions. Having the heel riser is nice if you're doing a lot of steep climbing, but all of that comes with a price. So just know that you can do a lot with just the low-end ones and get out and have some fun and practice with that. Like I said, then if you want to go on from there, then at that point look at investing more. But the reality is, from what I've seen, most people go out and snowshoe maybe once or twice in a winter and just never end up getting that into it. So there's really not much point in spending $200–300 right off the bat to get high-end gear and then find out you don't use it. Of course, if you do that and come to the conclusion that you're not going to use that sort of equipment, feel free to look up your nearest search and rescue unit and donate them to that group, because they most likely would make use of it. And as a SAR member, I highly encourage people to donate good equipment to the local unit if you find out that you're not using it. But that said, don't mean to get off track, but the reality is that the high-end gear is great, but for the vast majority of people it's way overpriced for what you're going to need. So don't go to that level until you are sure that you're going to use it and you need those extra capabilities. So anyway, that's just kind of a summary of some of the harsh realities that I've seen just over the years as I've gotten into snowshoeing, started doing it more and learning my way around, and just seeing what the expectations that other people have. So hopefully that information is useful to some of you, and if you're thinking of getting into snowshoeing, I do recommend it. It's fun. You can see all sorts of beautiful stuff out in the winter, but just start out with the right expectations, be aware of those realities, and take it slow. Hope you can enjoy that and go from there. So that's about all I have on the topic for now. This has been Republic Jim. I'll talk to you later.